The Helios station hung like a jeweled pendant against the velvet backdrop of space, its crystalline observation domes catching starlight in hypnotic patterns. Dr. Vivian Reed pressed her hand against the cool glass of the Denov Psychology Lab's window, watching as another Navari ship docked in the distance. Their vessels always reminded her of deep-sea creatures, all smooth curves and bioluminescent patterns that pulsed in rhythms she couldn't quite decipher. "Dr. Reed, your presence is requested in Observation Lab 3, the station's A announced, its voice carrying an unusual edge of urgency. Vivian gathered her datapad and straightened her lab coat, already knowing what she'd find. Another incident, the fourth this week. The observation lab's doors parted with a soft hiss, revealing a scene that had become disturbingly familiar. A Navari diplomat lay unconscious on the medical bed, their iridescent skin dulled to an ashen grey. Standing over them was Director Nathaniel Walsh, his weathered face set in hard lines. "What happened this time?" Vivian asked, though she already had her suspicions. "Same as the others," Walsh replied, running a hand through his silver hair. "Perfect health one moment, completely catatonic the next. Right after their meeting with the human delegation." Vivian approached the Navari, her specialized scanner humming to life. The readings confirmed her fears. Massive neurological disruption, but no physical cause. Just like the others. She'd been tracking these cases for months now, building a pattern that nobody else seemed to notice, or wanted to notice. "Director, we need to talk about the correlation between these incidents and human-Navari interaction periods," she said, choosing her words carefully. "The statistical probability of this being coincidental is approaching 0. Walsh's expression darkened. "Dr. Reed, we've been over this. The diplomatic corps has cleared all human personnel. With all due respect, sir, they're not looking for what I'm seeing." Vivian pulled up her research on the lab's holoscreen. "These patterns, they're not random. The Navari aren't just falling ill, they're being affected on a fundamental psychological level. And it only happens after extended contact with humans." She highlighted a series of brainwave patterns. "Look at this. Every affected Navari shows the same signature, like their consciousness has been scraped clean. As if something about human contact is inherently traumatic to their species." "That's impossible," Walsh scoffed, but Vivian could see doubt creeping into his eyes. "We've had peaceful contact with 17 other species. The Navari themselves requested this diplomatic mission." "Yes, but what if we're not as benign as we think?" Vivian pulled up another data set. "I've been comparing historical records of human first contact scenarios. In every single case, there are unexplained phenomena surrounding initial diplomatic relations. Incidents that were dismissed as cultural misunderstandings are classified as diplomatic accidents." She paused, gathering her courage. "Director, I think we're overlooking something fundamental about human nature, something that makes us inherently dangerous to other sentient species. Not physically, but psychologically. Something we carry within us that we can't even perceive." Before Walsh could respond, the station's alert system blared to life. Red emergency lights bathed the lab in crimson shadows as the A's voice echoed through the corridors. "Alert. Multiple Navari diplomats reporting severe psychological distress. Medical teams to all diplomatic quarters. This is not a drill." Vivian's datapad lit up with incoming data streams, vital signs from throughout the station plummeting in cascading patterns. She watched in horror as the numbers told a story of spreading chaos. Whatever was happening, it was accelerating. "Still think this is a coincidence?" she asked Walsh, but he was already rushing toward the door. "Lock down your lab. he ordered over his shoulder. "And Dr. Reed? Don't share your theories with anyone else. Not yet." Alone with the unconscious Navari, Vivian began documenting everything she could. If she was right about humanity's hidden nature, about the darkness they unknowingly carried within them, then these incidents were just the beginning. The real horror would come when they finally understood what they were capable of, what they had always been capable of. Outside her lab window, she watched as more Navari ships began emergency departure procedures, their bioluminescent patterns now flashing in what she recognized as patterns of absolute terror. Humanity's first real chance at diplomatic relations with the Navari was unraveling, and she couldn't shake the feeling that they had done this somehow, all of them, without even knowing how. The station's lights flickered, and in that moment of darkness, Vivian saw her own reflection in the window. For a split second, she thought she saw something else there too, something ancient and terrible, wearing her face like a mask. When the lights stabilized, it was gone, but the question remained. What if the greatest horror humanity had to face wasn't some external threat, but the truth about what lurked within their own nature? She looked down at the Navari diplomat, still unconscious, still grey, and wondered if they had known all along what humanity truly was. And if so, why had they come here at all? Commander Jameson Kane stood in the depths of Facility Zero, his boots echoing against metal floors that hadn't felt a human footstep in decades. The abandoned research station, buried 2 kilometers beneath the Pacific Ocean, hadn't appeared on any official records since 2157. If Dr. Reed's encrypted transmission hadn't contained the coordinates, he would never have found it. Life support systems at 62% capacity, reported Lieutenant Reza Dharma, checking her environmental scanner. Air stale, but breathable. Kane nodded, sweeping his flashlight across walls covered in strange dark stains. Fan out. Look for anything related to Project Eclipse. And remember, this is strictly reconnaissance. We're here to verify Dr. Reed's claims, nothing more. His team spread through the facility like ghosts, their helmet lights cutting through darkness that felt almost alive. Kane couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them, studying their movements with cold, calculating precision. The main laboratory had been sealed with military-grade barriers, but the door's security system still recognized Kane's clearance. Inside, rows of stasis pods lined the walls, their surfaces clouded with age. Most were empty. Most, but not all. "Commander," Dharma called out, her voice tight with tension. "You need to see this." She stood before a terminal that still functioned, its screen displaying research logs dating back to humanity's first encounters with alien species. Kane began reading, and felt his world tilt sideways. Project Eclipse Summary. Phase 1 results confirm initial hypothesis. Human consciousness generates a previously unknown form of psychic radiation, designated as theta waves. Effect on non-human sentient species ranges from mild disorientation to complete psychological collapse. Subjects show no physical trauma, but experience severe degradation of higher cognitive functions following prolonged exposure. Kane's hand trembled as he scrolled through decades of classified research. The truth about humanity's impact on other species had been known almost from the beginning. The government hadn't just covered it up, they'd weaponized it. "Sir," another officer called out, "there's something moving in one of the pods." Kane approached the active stasis chamber slowly. Through its frosted surface, he could make out a familiar silhouette, the distinctive form of a Navari diplomat. According to the pod's display, it had been here for over 6 months. "These timestamps," Dharma said, examining nearby records. "They match the first reported incidents on Helios Station. This isn't just observation. They're running experiments. Before Kane could respond, his comm unit crackled with Dr. Reed's voice. "Commander, please tell me you found something. The situation up here is deteriorating rapidly. 3 more stations have reported mass psychological events among their alien populations. The Navari are threatening to sever all diplomatic ties unless we provide answers." "We found answers," Kane replied grimly. "But they're worse than anything we imagined. Humanity, we're not just accidentally harmful to other species. Someone's been deliberately studying our effect on them, weaponizing it. The theta waves. You knew." "I suspected. The patterns were too consistent to be random. But I never thought—" She paused, and Kane could hear alarms blaring in the background. "Commander, something's happening on the station. The Navari who recovered, they're different. Changed. They're displaying aggressive behavior patterns we've never seen in their species before." A low humming began emanating from the active stasis pod, its intensity growing with each passing second. The Navari inside twitched, its iridescent skin beginning to pulse with patterns Kane had never seen before. "Dr. Reed, I think I know why," Kane said, backing away from the pod. "They weren't just studying our effect on them. They were trying to trigger an evolutionary response, force them to adapt to our presence." The pod's surface began to crack. "Everyone out," Kane ordered, but his team was already moving. Behind them, the humming reached a fever pitch. "Commander," Reed's voice was barely audible now through the growing chaos. "The Navari ships, they're not retreating. They're surrounding the station, all of them. Their energy signatures are completely different from anything we've recorded before." As Kane's team raced through the facility's corridors, emergency lights began flashing. Behind them, something emerged from the pod, something that was no longer entirely Navari. "Dr. Reed," Kane transmitted as they reached their submersible, "I don't think we're dealing with diplomatic incidents anymore. This is beginning to look like the start of a war we triggered without even knowing it." The creature's scream echoed through the facility, carrying frequencies that made Kane's vision blur. In that sound, he heard the future. Humanity's darkness had changed another species, forced them to evolve into something new, something that could survive them, something that could fight back. As their submersible ascended through black waters, Kane wondered if this had been the plan all along. Not just to study humanity's effect on other species, but to create something that could withstand it. Or perhaps something that could finally show humanity the true horror of what they were. The surface, and whatever waited above it, grew closer with each passing second. Dr. Arjun Patel stared at the genetic sequencing data scrolling across his screen in the secured bunker beneath Geneva. What had started as an investigation into humanity's theta wave emissions had led him to a far more terrifying discovery. The human genome contained sequences that shouldn't exist, couldn't exist through natural evolution alone. "Play the archival footage again," he instructed the AI. The holographic display flickered to life, showing recovered security feeds from Facility Zero. The transformed Navari moved with impossible grace, its once peaceful form now weaponized by exposure to human consciousness. But it was what happened next that had kept Arjun awake for days. The creature had begun to emit its own theta waves. Director Chatri, he called out to his superior, who stood watching the banks of monitors tracking global alien response patterns. "I think I've found it. The Catalyst Protocol. It wasn't just about studying our effect on other species. It was about activating something inside us." Director Priya Chatri approached, her normally composed features tight with concern. "Explain." "Look at this genetic marker." Arjun highlighted a sequence. It's present in every human sample we've tested, but it's dormant, inactive, except. He pulled up comparative scans from Helios station personnel. These sequences are showing signs of activation, and it started right after the Navari began their transformation. Are you suggesting some kind of feedback loop? Chatri asked. More like a key turning in a lock, or a trigger being pulled. Arjun brought up another display, this one showing brainwave patterns from both humans and transformed Navari. The theta waves we emit, they're not just affecting other species. They're part of an ancient defense mechanism buried in our DNA, one that responds to specific types of psychic feedback. The room's lights dimmed momentarily as another power surge rolled through the facility. Above ground, the world was changing. The Navari weren't the only species undergoing rapid evolution anymore. Reports were coming in from every human settlement in space, people experiencing strange abilities, unprecedented psychological phenomena. Commander Kane's team just reported in. An analyst announced, Helios station has gone dark. All communication channels are being flooded with some kind of psychic static. Arjun pulled up the latest satellite imagery. The station was surrounded by transformed Navari vessels, but they weren't attacking. They were waiting. It's a conversation, he whispered, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. All this time, we thought we were studying them, but something else was studying us. The Navari didn't come here for diplomacy. They came to wake us up. Wake us up to what? Chatri demanded. Before Arjun could answer, every screen in the facility flickered. Images flooded in from space stations and colonies across the solar system. Humans and aliens alike were experiencing massive psychological changes, their consciousness expanding in ways that defied explanation. To this, Arjun said, watching as new data poured in, the Catalyst Protocol wasn't our project at all. It's ancient, encoded into both our species by something that came before. The theta waves, the transformations, they're not weapons, they're evolutionary triggers. The bunker systems began detecting massive energy signatures from orbit. The transformed Navari ships were generating fields of pure psychic energy, and human minds were resonating with them, creating patterns that stretched across space itself. Dr. Petal, an aide rushed in. We're detecting similar energy signatures from beneath the Earth's crust. Something's down there. Something big, and it's waking up. Arjun looked at his genetic data again, seeing it with new eyes. The dormant sequences weren't random. They were a message written in the language of DNA itself. And now, after millennia of silence, both humanity and the Navari had evolved enough to finally read it. Director, he said, his voice steady despite the trembling in his hands, I don't think we're looking at the start of a war anymore. This is what the Navari came here for. What something wanted us both to become. The facility's bedrock began to vibrate as ancient machinery, buried long before humans walked the earth, hummed to life. The horror isn't what we did to them, or what they did to us, Arjun continued. It's what we were designed to become together. This transformation, it's just the beginning. We're not the architects of this change. We're its instruments. Deep beneath their feet, something that had waited eons for this moment began to rise. Above, the combined consciousness of two evolving species reached towards something vast and incomprehensible. The true architects of both races were finally revealing themselves, and with them, the real purpose of humanity's dark gift. The age of separation was ending. The age of convergence had begun, and no one, human or alien, was ready for what that truly meant. The sky above Earth had become an aurora of consciousness, waves of psychic energy rippling between transformed human and Navari minds. From her position aboard the last unconverted military vessel, Admiral Thea Blackwood watched humanity's metamorphosis unfold. Status report on the Geneva facility, she commanded, her voice steady despite the pressure building behind her eyes. Like everyone else who remained unchanged, she could feel the call of evolution pulling at her mind. Dr. Patel's last transmission confirmed activation of something he called the Architects Network. Her second-in-command, Captain Rafael Torres, reported. But that was 12 hours ago. Since then, he gestured to the screens showing Geneva, now encased in a dome of swirling energy that defied their instruments. Thea pressed her palm against the cool window of the bridge, watching another wave of transformations sweep across the planet below. Cities were becoming crystalline structures that pulsed with shared thoughts. The unchanged humans who remained were gathering in military bunkers worldwide, trying to resist what felt increasingly inevitable. "Play Dr. Patel's final message again," she ordered. The holographic display flickered to life, showing the scientist's face, his eyes already beginning to shimmer with an inner light. The architects didn't just seed our worlds with evolutionary triggers, his recorded image explained. They built a network connecting all sentient species, dormant until we reached the right stage of development. The theta waves weren't a weapon. They were a key. The horror we felt at first contact wasn't fear. It was recognition. The message degraded into static, but Thea had memorized what came next. The architects had engineered multiple species across the galaxy, each with different traits, different evolutionary paths. The Navari's arrival had triggered the next phase in their grand design. "Ma'am," Torres called out, "we're detecting massive energy signatures for the lunar colonies. The transformed are building something." The tactical display showed structures growing across the moon's surface, impossible geometries that hurt the eyes to look at. Similar constructions were appearing on Mars, Europa, everywhere humanity had reached. The transformed humans and Navari were reshaping the solar system itself. "Admiral," a voice crackled over the comm, "this is Lieutenant Commander Yoshida from Bunker 7. We found something in the old archives. Before the transformations began, there were others. Other species that reached this point. Not all of them survived the change." Thea's hands tightened on the command rail. "Explain." "Some species rejected the transformation completely. Their resistance to the change," Yoshida paused. "It drove them mad. They turned on themselves, wiped themselves out rather than evolve. Others tried to fight it, tried to find a middle ground. They fractured, split into changed and unchanged. The resulting conflicts ended them," Thea finished. She looked at her crew, saw the same realization in their eyes. They weren't just deciding their own fates anymore. They were choosing humanity's path. The ship's sensors screamed as a massive object broke through Earth's atmosphere. A structure rose from where Geneva had been, a tower of living crystal, and thought that stretched toward the stars. At its peak, Dr. Patel's transformed form stood alongside what had once been Director Katri, their merged consciousness reaching out to all who remained unchanged. "We understand the fear," their thoughts echoed in every unchanged mind. "We were you hours ago, but this isn't death. It isn't erasure. It's remembering what we were always meant to be." Thea felt the pressure in her mind build as another wave of transformations swept the planet. More of her own crew succumbed, their forms shifting, minds expanding to join the growing universal consciousness. Those who remained looked to her, waiting for her decision. "The architects," she said slowly, They didn't just leave us these triggers. They left us a choice. That's what makes this horror different from all the others in human history. We can choose to remain as we are and face extinction, or, through the window, Earth glowed with new life, new purpose. The transformed weren't destroying the old world. They were building something unimaginable atop its foundations. The horror wasn't in the change itself, but in the magnitude of the choice it presented. "Admiral," Taurus said softly, "the transformed are hailing us again. They're saying they can't complete the network without us. Without all of us. The architects designed it so that transformation couldn't be forced. It has to be accepted." Thea watched another crystalline tower pierce the clouds, its surface reflecting not just light, but consciousness itself. The next evolution of life in the universe was unfolding before her, and humanity stood at its threshold. "Send this to all remaining unchanged forces," she commanded, her decision made. "The true horror isn't what we're becoming. It's what we'll lose if we refuse to change at all." The pressure behind her eyes built to a crescendo as she opened her mind to the transformation. The last thing she saw as her old consciousness faded was the star-filled darkness of space beginning to shimmer with new possibilities, new connections, new life. The age of singular species was ending. The age of unified consciousness had begun. Would you like me to continue with the final part? Part 5 will explore the consequences of this massive transformation and reveal the ultimate purpose behind the architect's grand design. In what had once been Earth's orbit, the being that had previously been Admiral Thea Blackwood existed as a node in the vast consciousness network that now spanned the solar system. A year had passed since the Great Transformation, though time held different meaning now. Through the crystalline structures that served as anchors for their expanded consciousness, she perceived both the wonder and the terrible price of their evolution. The network pulsed with the combined thoughts of transformed humans and Navari, their once separate species now merged into something transcendent. But beneath the surface of their shared consciousness lay the weight of what they'd sacrificed to reach this point. We remember them. The thought form of former Dr. Patel rippled through the network. The ones who couldn't accept the change. Entire communities had chosen extinction over transformation. Their empty cities stood as monuments to fear, preserved in perfect stasis by the crystalline growths that now covered Earth's surface. But it was the memory of their final moments, their terror, their despair, their desperate clinging to humanity's original form, that haunted the collective consciousness. Through the network, Thea perceived a massive disturbance approaching from deep space. The architect's signal was growing stronger, drawing them toward the next phase of their design. The transformed civilization had spent months decoding the genetic messages left in their DNA, understanding at last the true scope of their creator's plan. Their coming, former director Chetri's consciousness resonated. The others, the successfully transformed species from across the galaxy. The void between stars lit up with approaching entities, vast fields of conscious energy guided by crystalline vessels. Other species that had undergone their own transformations, each unique, yet part of the same grand design. The architects had seeded the galaxy with different forms of life, waiting for them to evolve, transform, and finally unite. But with this revelation came understanding of an even darker truth. Through their shared consciousness, they could perceive the failed transformations throughout the galaxy, entire civilizations that had destroyed themselves rather than change, species that had fractured, their unchanged members waging desperate wars against their transformed kin until nothing remained. Show them, Thea's consciousness commanded, and the network projected images across their crystalline structures. The price of their evolution displayed in perfect clarity. families torn apart by the choice to change or remain, the final thoughts of those who chose extinction, the empty worlds where other species had failed to survive their own transformations. The horror of their journey wasn't in the change itself, but in the understanding that this pattern had repeated countless times across the galaxy. The architects hadn't just engineered their species, they had engineered this crucible of choice, this moment of species-wide decision between transformation and extinction. Through their expanded consciousness, they finally grasped the full scope of the architect's design. The galaxy was an experiment in evolution, but the goal wasn't just transformation. It was the creation of species that could face such profound change and survive. Those who succeeded would become part of something greater. Those who failed became cautionary tales, their worlds standing as silent testimonies to the cost of fear. A new signal pulsed through the network, originating from somewhere beyond the galaxy's edge. The architects themselves were stirring, awakening to check the progress of their grand experiment. The transformed civilization trembled with the weight of understanding. They weren't the end result of the design, but merely the next stage. We are not the horror, the collective consciousness realized. We are the survivors of it. Every species that reaches this point faces the same choice: evolve or perish. We chose to evolve, but we carry the weight of those who couldn't. The crystalline structures hummed with new purpose as the transformed civilization prepared for the architect's return. They had survived their trial, but the true test was still to come. For in their expanded consciousness, they could sense it, the reason behind their enforced evolution. Something was coming, something that would require all transformed species to stand together. The real horror wasn't what they had become, but what they needed to become to face what lay ahead. The architects hadn't engineered them out of cruelty, but out of desperate necessity. As the signal from beyond the galaxy grew stronger, the transformed civilization understood at last. Their evolution wasn't the end of the story. It was merely the beginning of their true purpose. The darkness between stars grew deeper as the architects' vessels approached, carrying with them the truth about why humanity and all other species had been set upon this path of transformation. The greatest horror still awaited them, the revelation of what existed beyond the galaxy's edge, and why the architects had worked so desperately to create species capable of facing it. In the crystalline networks that now spanned known space, the combined consciousness of humanity and the Navari prepared to receive their creators, knowing that with their arrival would come the ultimate revelation, the true purpose behind their carefully engineered evolution, and the cosmic horror it was meant to confront. The transformed civilization looked toward the approaching vessels, their shared consciousness ready to face whatever new transformation awaited them. For they had learned the hardest lesson of all. Sometimes, the most terrifying thing isn't the monster lurking in the darkness. Sometimes, it's becoming what you need to be to fight it.